on the live stream. We have a privilege this morning. My son, Todd Richard Merrill, he goes by Todd, we still call him Rich, is here with us this morning from Indianapolis. He'll be speaking. I'm not up to speaking. Our faith has not been shattered, but our hearts have been. And so give me another week. Give me another week and I'll be able to preach again, I'm sure. But this past week, my wife and I, our daughter and son-in-law lost, oh, this is hard, lost their oldest son on Monday. And the memorial service was yesterday. Anyway, I don't want to say more. We've shed buckets of tears and our hearts are shattered and broken. And Justice, that's why I didn't get back in touch with you. Monday night we got the news. And so he was involved in a motor vehicle accident where he lost his life. So we've had, needless to say, a very rough week. The hardest, I think, in our lifetime. But God continues to sustain us. And I couldn't help but think as we took the Lord's Supper that Mary stood by and watched her son die. It's like, that's a huge price that God paid so that we could be forgiven of our sins. Anyway, do pray for Jim and Bridget. Pray for Rachel, Nathan, and Julia as they try to cope with the loss of their brother. See, am I forgetting something? I'm sure I am. Anyway, thank you for coming, everybody. And thanks, and pray for the grandparents on Dad's side. Jim's sisters are here. Pray for them too. Pray for my wife and I as grandparents on Mom's side. And for Bridget's siblings that were 5 out of 6 were here. Meant a lot to us to have them here. And I know our boys were very gracious to my wife and I to be kind, to help us through. And they came to help their sister and brother-in-law and their children. So much for that. It will be a privilege to hear my son speak. He's not a preacher, but he loves the Lord, and he's going to share something that God's put on his heart.
Good morning, everybody. So music is important in my life because there's so many more eloquent people than me that write music, and there's some beautiful songs. So like when I heard about all this, I was just flipping through a playlist we have, and I found a couple songs, and I just want to play one for you. I will not attempt to sing it. That would not be pleasant. So I'll go ahead and play this for you. Hopefully it comes across on the live version okay. I tried it yesterday and it worked on here, so I'm just going to play it. And listen to the words on this song. It really talks about a lot about how we feel in these moments. So. beautiful song. Says words that we regular people can't think of. That's why music's so important to me. So many beautiful songs. There's one, Danny Goki actually wrote a song after he lost his wife that just beautiful too. There's so many songs that just really like moves your soul. So just one of my favorites. I just want to talk a little bit today about hope. My dad asked me to say a few words, and he didn't ask me to sing, you noticed, so he figured I talk a lot so I can at least say something. So there's lots of scratches on my notes and my cards that I was writing, because I call it type erase. You talk and then nope, not that. So back and forth with what to say. Hard to know what to say in these times. So I just want to share with you one of the things that I love to tell my kids. I was telling Rachel one of my sayings: inside thoughts, outside thoughts. You can have lots of inside thoughts. Just try not to let them come outside. Rule for life. It took me, how old am I, 45 years to learn that, and I'm still learning. So one of the other ones I learned, or that I told my kids, was life isn't fair. They like to go, whatever the situation, it isn't fair, Dad. I said that to God this week. Things like this just kind of rock our boat. It causes you to doubt your faith, doubt what we believe in. What is it? Why am I believing in this? What does it mean? By nature, I like to fix things. So I'd like to fix things for my sister. What do you fix? There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to say. There's nothing to do but love. It's times like this that tell me I'm not in control. I want to keep my kids safe. I want to succeed at work. I want to have a strong marriage. I want to have a strong family. I want to have a strong faith. I'm not in control. And that was just some of the things I was thinking through this week. Like where am I at in life? I still ask the same questions. God, what are you doing here? What's happening? Are you not paying attention? Do you not see what's happening down here? And then I realized through some friends and a wife that we got to dig deeper than that, because our feelings, they take a hold of us in these times, and they bombard our mind with doubts and fears. So we have to go back to the basics, really. One of the verses, when I went back to school to get my degree, it was kind of like the verse that they gave at the beginning of the whole course. And it stuck with me because it's beautiful, because it tells the story of our life. It's Jeremiah 29:11. So you don't have to turn there. I wrote all these down because my Bible was on my phone, and that proves a little difficult in reading. So I typed it out here. The verse is Jeremiah 29:11. For I know the plan I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. I mean, what more can we ask for from a God that has that in mind for us? And sometimes it doesn't feel like that. Sometimes it feels like, you're harming me, God. You're allowing me to be harmed. But his plan is not that for us. His plan is to prosper us, to lift us up, to give us a future. And really, that's kind of what we want to focus on, is that future. I'll get to it later on, and our pastor likes to use the term lower story and upper story. We get so focused on that lower story and everything that's happening right here on the ground that we lose track of what God sees. I mean, I can think of a million times, even in my life, daily moments that I get bogged down in the details and forget, oh yeah, you're at work and you're frustrated and everything's crashing down, and it's this is horrible. My job stinks. And then you take a minute and you go, wait a minute. Well, I'm doing this so that I don't have to work again. Travis and I were talking about retirement yesterday. I don't love my job, but I love the fact that it allows me to retire and not work. kind of like God with us, he realizes the work that we're doing down here in this lower story is preparing us for that retirement in heaven. So I got like 2 or 3 points here of just kind of things that I learned in my life regarding loss and regarding looking to God versus looking to my own abilities to get me through these times. So my first one is, who do I lean on? And that's where we really have to, in these unthinkable tragedies happen, we have to go, who do I lean on? And I know for most of my life it's been easy for me just to lean on myself, to seclude myself, to kind of back into the cave and go, hey, I'll get through this, just leave me alone for a minute. Amy and I were married 13 years ago, and that's one of the things that she's taught me is to open your heart. When you open your heart, you're going to get it broken. When you open your heart to people, they're going to stomp on it. Probably one of the bad parts of being a preacher's kid is seeing how bad people treat preachers. When people are upset, they be sure and let the preacher know. You know, I saw that most of my life and decided I don't ever want to be a preacher. So it's taken me a long time in my life to realize that, like, hey, even though it's safe to back into that corner and to keep people at bay, it really doesn't open your heart up for growth. And I just kind of wanted to share with you a few people in my life that have impacted that and have allowed me to grow as a person spiritually. And that all starts with my mom and dad, you know, and my mom and dad, people ask me when I went to church, and I'm like, I went to church since I was born. I don't know if they brought me to the hospital or to church, or they were probably both the same place, so it was probably the same. So, but that foundation, you know, when I talk with other couples, we serve in a marriage ministry, and when I talk to other couples about parenting, you know, kind of that's my advice is, you know, from my dad instilled in me that foundation. When your kids get to 15, 16, 17, you start going, man, what did I tell them anything? Keep doing those things because you build that foundation, and then later on when they grow up, those things start coming together and clicking. You know, I'm sure many of us in here can speak to that about how as you mature, you realize that, oh, hey, I do have a faith that started a long, long time ago. And honestly, that's where it does start with our parents. And I just want to thank my parents for being that and building that. A couple other friends of mine, just kind of a couple notable ones. My friend Blake, I think I met him probably 19 years ago. And he met me in a time in my life when I really didn't let people around me. I really didn't make very good friends. I wasn't a good friend just because I tried to keep people at bay. And him and his wife Edwina took me in and became my friends and befriended me when I wasn't very friendly. And I owe a lot of that in my life to him because he opened his heart. And he was always the guy who, when you're talking to him, if you're sad or mad or any of those emotions, he would not be afraid to stop right there, grab your hand wherever you were at, and pray with you. It was quite humorous because one of my friends, who's a big weightlifter, he's very jacked and very, I would say, fairly worldly. My friend Blake, he's a friend of ours. Well, Blake grabbed his hand when they were at a park eating lunch and prayed with him. He's like, he freaked me out with that. And I'm like, I go, that speaks to Blake's nature. He has no fear. All he cares about is you. He doesn't care anything what's going on around. He doesn't care what people think. He wouldn't be afraid to grab your hand and say a prayer right there with you. So over the past 19 years, I know him and I's friendship has blossomed, and he actually moved to Madison, Wisconsin, but I work in Chicago, so we meet on my work days and have lunch sometimes up there in Chicago. So Blake has been a blessing to me and really built my faith. Another friend of mine, Mark Trump, he's my brother that's closer than my brothers, I would say. I met him, and he was fairly young. He was actually a salesman that called on me, and I wasn't very nice to salesmen. I told you, Kaylana, that I wasn't very nice, so you can imagine this. I wasn't very nice to salespeople. Well, he is the salesman of salesmen, and he never quit calling on me. And probably 5 years later, it all started clicking on, this is a man of God who has a faith that's bigger than anyone that I know. And I think he's about 7 years younger than me. And just to share with you his faith, he had a career job as a salesman, and he quit that job to move him and his 5 kids to New Zealand to become a missionary. One day he said, I want to do something more. And I'm like, well, maybe now's not the time. His youngest was 4, I think. And he kept praying about it, and I was praying for him that his eyes would be open to not going, honestly. There were so many times that God came and bombarded him with signs. Like it bolstered my faith to see his faith built up. He told one story about he was praying about it, and him and his wife were like, hey, we need to go on a date. They went on a date, and they were at a mall that was closed, and they were waiting to go into the restaurant that was attached. And he's like, well, I need to use the restroom. I'm going to walk in the mall. So he walks in the empty mall. He walks up there, and walking out of the bathroom is the missionary who was trying to get him to come to New Zealand. And like him and his wife have been praying, God, we just need something here, something to show us what we need to do. And it wasn't, I think, 2 or 3 days later that he's walking in this closed mall, and here's the guy that is recruiting him. And he called me that next day and said, hey, we're going to New Zealand. He's like, you ask for God for a sign, and you can't get much clearer than that. So, like, my faith, through his faith, was built up. The other person in my life is my wife. Like, I told you that 13 years ago we got married, and her role has been to show me how to open my heart and to be softer toward people. That protective nature of mine to protect myself. I'm by nature an introvert and an extrovert through work. So my nature really is to close myself off to people and not be open to people. And that's one thing. My faith has been deepened through my wife by just being softer in my heart and being more tender toward people. And then the last person I want to mention, and I mention him because I want to read one of his stories. Tony Dungy was a football coach for the Indianapolis Colts about, I'd say, 10 or 12 years ago. And he's a man of faith. I'm a New England Patriots fan. And so the Colts were not our friends. In my job, I was able to attend a lot of football games, and I became a fan of the Indianapolis Colts through Tony Dungy. I saw this man who wasn't afraid to speak about his faith, a man who on public TV would talk about his faith and his family and how much all of that meant to him. And then I started seeing players talk about it. Like, you're talking some of the toughest cases in the NFL, talking about how Tony Dungy impacted their lives. Probably, I would say, he was toward the end of his coaching career with the Colts when he lost his 19-year-old son. His son was away at college, and he lost his 19-year-old son. And to hear him talk about all of those experiences, his regrets, he talks quite openly about his regrets of working too much and the late nights he put in the NFL when he wasn't home to put his kids to bed. And about the last time he saw his son and he didn't say, I love you. They were in a hurry at the airport, and they were like, hey, see you. Both went their ways. And he said, that's the last time I got to see my son. So Tony Dungy, through all of that, his faith is strong. He's still now even a commentator for the NFL and just still a witness through his life. And one of the biggest things he did after that was he started a foundation called All Pro Dads. And this is a foundation that he uses to build up fathers, to be better fathers. Through his life and through his experiences, positive and negative, he realized there were some shortcomings that happened. And he realized that we really do need to build better dads. And so one of his stories, I just want to read it. I can't do it justice. And it's kind of a football story, so if you don't know football, just bear with it. It will play out. Here's Tony Dungy. We use faith all the time in football. The cover 2 defense requires a great deal of faith, and it can take players quite a while to get acclimated. Some never do, because the defense is so assignment-oriented. Players need to trust and have faith for it to work. They aren't allowed to freelance or simply run to the ball. They have to protect their areas, staying in their gaps and trusting the system. They have to trust that everyone else will do his particular assignment and have faith that if it occurs, the defense will be effective. Offense requires faith as well. Peyton Manning would throw most of his passes to a set spot before the receiver even made his final break to the ball. He has to have faith that the receiver will run the proper route and arrive at the spot when the ball gets there. The receiver has to have faith that if he runs his route at the proper depth and with the proper speed, the ball will be thrown to the spot where he can catch it. Life works the same way. If you're experiencing something difficult right now, or perhaps even if you're not, there's a message of hope through faith in God who's bigger than all of it. And I love that example because it is kind of like us in life. If you think of a receiver, in Indianapolis there was a big deal made up of Peyton Manning and his trust in his receivers. And if you think about that, his receivers would run that same route 200 times before every game so that Peyton Manning didn't even think about it. When he said hike and brought that ball back, he knew that in whatever it was, 3.5 seconds, Marvin Harrison would be right at that spot and he knew right where to throw it. Peyton Manning wasn't the greatest quarterback ever. He wasn't the greatest athlete ever. But his faith in his receivers made him a great, great quarterback. And to bring that down to life, it just is so pertinent for me, us running in this race. We don't know where the ball is sometimes. I don't know where the ball is most of the time. But we're running to that spot knowing that God, in that bigger, higher picture, knows exactly where you're going to. He assumes you're going to be there. And if you have trust in him and run that route, you're going to be at the end to catch that ball. The second point I want to talk about is I'm not in control. So that's kind of a more difficult thing. Times like these really reinforce that we are not in control. We can't control anything. It's all, we live in a broken, fallen world, and life happens around us every day. I want to read a verse that's often misconstrued about life. Romans 8:28 says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose." And the way I kind of misconstrue it sometimes is that God is working things out to my good, not for my good. God's going to make things successful if I follow all of his rules. To put it short, if I live this way and raise my kids this way and work in this job and do this, God's going to make sure all those chess pieces fit. Well, the verse says God works out things for our good. I said something about us working in a marriage ministry, and that's been one of the things that showed me that time and time again. Trying to follow the rules doesn't always work. Trying to do the right things doesn't always work. I can tell you my wife and I have had the hardest struggles of our marriage where were times where we took a break from it, and when we would come back to it, it seemed like those times when we had the most marriage struggles. And I would have to come to the first week of class and say, "Hey, I'm here to tell you what God says about marriage, because I feel like I'm failing daily." It seemed to happen every time we would get more and more involved with that group, is that we struggled more and more with life. And that is the nature of life. That is the nature of the world we live in, the sinful, broken world. Just because we follow God doesn't mean all the right things happen to us. This verse talks more about God having everything in his sights. That sermon series that our pastor preached, he was preaching the whole Bible. So he said he was going to preach from Genesis to Revelation. And he said it's going to take a long, long time. And he joked about it. He said, "I'm going to go verse by verse through the Bible." And it was very weird me thinking about it, because I'm like, well, you're going to preach on the whole Bible? Because there's a lot of stuff in there that's very, very confusing. When you get to the begat, who begat. And it was very interesting because he named the title of it God's Upper Story and God's Lower Story. He actually took it out of the Story Bible. There's a book that's written like a novel. So they kind of go through the whole Bible as a story. And that's what our preacher attempted to do, is go, hey, here was the lower story that happened. Noah, David, Solomon. all these characters in the Bible, and here was the upper story that God had working through these people's lives. And over and over and over, the story played out that the story we saw right here where we're sitting wasn't the bigger story. And so some of the names that I picked up were Paul, David, Matthew, Moses, Peter. Well, think of those stories. Those weren't like clean, nice, neat little stories with storybook endings about how they did all the right things. Like almost every one of those names has mess-ups and tragedies and sin and humanness attached to it. But God's upper story, God knew, it was almost like he took the worst of the worst and said, I got you. I can work through you. And it just amazed me through that. It took us 3.5 years to go through the Bible, and it was the most amazing Bible sermons that I ever heard, because it really did enlighten me to what happened in the Bible. And really, the Bible is just a story of collections of how God used people like me and you through our brokenness, through our weakness, through our sin. And I thought this week, like, over and over while that sermon series was going on, that's what it was in my head. If God can use these guys and accomplish huge, great things, like, what can he do with me? Like, I'm not even getting close to what these guys did, but I can't let that stop me. I can't let my doubt and my sin and my fear stop me from letting God use me. The last part of that was our problems, our worries, and our sins and pain all work together in God's time for his purpose. That's kind of summing up that verse. Everything does work together for his good. It might not be tomorrow, may not be next week, but it does work things together for God's good. And then the last thing I just wanted to say was kind of lessons I learned in my life was I have to have faith and trust in God. I cannot trust myself. I will fail. I will not have enough strength. I will not have the words to say. I won't be able to fix it. I have to have faith and trust in God. And it's through these times that my reliance on God has become more and more necessary. When things beyond our comprehension happen, like, that's when we realize, I can't do it. I don't have this under control. And through our lives, it's more and more because, days, years, we have problems when our kids don't listen. I have, 20 to 22-year-olds. They got all multiple of issues through them. I mean, there's people here with children. If you have children, you have problems. If you have a marriage, you have a problem. If you have a job, you have problems. All of those things bring problems to me that I can't control. Well, my son was here with me this week. Him and I were in a dispute over some things that were happening, and those things happen. It's very frustrating. They're outside of my control. That's something that I have to tell myself over and over. I have no control of this. I have to rely on God. I have to let God work through my life, to my son, to my daughter, to my family, to my wife. I got to let God work through that to influence them. I can't do it on my own. It's in the face of these circumstances that we're reminded by God's work through our mentors, through our families, that God is here. God is with you every step of the way. And that's why I especially mention those mentors. Those were people who really stepped in my life. One of the ones I didn't even mention today was the first one to text me yesterday and say, pray. Just the simple praying for you today. Like, those are the people that you need in your life. Those are the people that you need that random text from on that rough day to get you through. Those are the people that when you're having a rough time, you can go, hey, pray for me. I'm about ready to lose my cool with my son. I'm saying that, that's not me. I never said that. So the last thing I want to do is I want to read you 2 verses that really talk about the hope God gives to us. The first one is Psalm 62, 5 through 6. It says, yes, my soul, find rest in God. My hope comes from him. Yes, he is my rock. My salvation, he is my safe place. I will not be shaken. And then 2 Corinthians 4:18 says, so we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since what we see is temporary, but what we cannot see is eternal. Just really sums up God's message to us. And then I'm going to play you one last song. Beautiful song that just kind of gives glory to God and really shows us who we worship and who we try to glorify. The name of the song is The Great I Am. Some of you probably have heard this song before. So just listen to the words of this last song as we close.
Thank you, son.